They thought she was weak. They thought silence meant surrender. But when three rich boys cornered a quiet black girl against the classroom wall, they had no idea who they were dealing with. What happened in the next 60 seconds would spark a revolution that would bring down an empire of corruption, expose a multi-million-dollar scandal, and prove that the most dangerous person in the room isn't the one who talks the loudest. It's the one who knows exactly when to strike back. Stay with me until the end of this story, and comment what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this message can travel. The fluorescent lights of Crestwood High flickered with that persistent hum that somehow made everything feel more sterile, more cold. Room 207 smelled like old textbooks and broken dreams, the kind of place where hope went to die quietly in the back row. It was third period on a Tuesday, and Mr. Patterson stood at the front of the class, droning on about the American Revolution with all the passion of someone reading a phone book. Alyssa Carter sat in the second-to-last row, her dark eyes fixed on the notebook in front of her. She'd been at Crestwood for exactly 2 weeks, and in those 14 days, she'd mastered the art of invisibility. Her black hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, her clothes deliberately plain jeans, and a gray hoodie that seemed designed to help her fade into the beige walls. She took notes in careful, precise handwriting, her pen moving steadily across the page as Mr. Patterson's voice became white noise. She'd learned early that at schools like this, being the new kid was hard enough. Being the new black kid at a school where the parking lot looked like a luxury car dealership made you a target. So Alyssa had developed a strategy: be quiet, be small, be nothing they could grab onto. But silence, she was learning, was its own kind of provocation. Brandon Hale sat 3 rows ahead, and 2 seats to the right, sprawled in his chair like he owned it, because in many ways he did. His father, Richard Hale, had donated the new gymnasium, the computer lab, and probably half the desks in this very classroom. Brandon had sandy blonde hair that fell perfectly across his forehead, the kind of casual, expensive haircut that screamed wealth without trying. His designer sneakers, limited edition, probably cost more than most people's rent, were propped up on the chair in front of him, and he was scrolling through his phone with the confidence of someone who'd never been told no in his entire life. Next to him, Mason Torres and Tyler Chen laughed at something on Brandon's screen. The 3 of them had been inseparable since kindergarten, bonded by country club memberships and parents who played golf together on Sundays. They were the golden boys of Crestwood, the ones whose last names got their first names overlooked when trouble came calling. Brandon glanced back, and his eyes landed on Alyssa. She felt his gaze like a physical thing, but she didn't look up. She kept writing, kept her breathing steady, kept her face neutral. "Hey," Brandon said loud enough that half the class could hear. "Hey, new girl." Alyssa's pen paused for half a second, then continued moving. Mr. Patterson was writing something on the board, his back turned completely oblivious. "I'm talking to you," Brandon said louder now. Mason and Tyler were already grinning, sensing blood in the water. Slowly, Alyssa looked up. Her face was calm, almost serene. "Yes," Brandon smirked. "You got the homework answers. I mean, you're always writing in that little book. Must be something important." A few students snickered. Alyssa met his gaze steadily. "It's my notes." "Your notes," Brandon repeated, mimicking her quiet tone in a mocking falsetto. "Wow, so studious, so serious." He leaned back in his chair, playing to his audience. "What do you think, you're gonna be valedictorian or something?" "Hate to break it to you, sweetheart, but that spot's already reserved." Tyler snorted. "Yeah, for people who actually belong here." The classroom had gone quiet, now that particular silence that happens when everyone knows something bad is about to happen, and no one wants to stop it. Even Mr. Patterson must have sensed it because he turned around, his eyes scanning the room with the vague concern of someone who gets paid too little to care too much. "Is there a problem, Mr.?" Patterson asked, his voice carrying that warning tone that said, "Please don't make me actually do something about this." "No problem, Mr. P," Brandon said smoothly, flashing that all-American smile that had charmed his way out of detention 100 times. "Just welcoming our new classmate, making her feel included." Mr. Patterson's eyes flicked to Alyssa, then back to Brandon. For a moment, just a moment, something that might have been shame crossed his features. But then he glanced at the plaque on the wall, the one that read, "Hail Family Science Wing," and whatever courage he'd been gathering evaporated. "Just keep it down," Mr. Patterson said weakly, and turned back to the board. Brandon's smirk widened. He'd won, and everyone knew it. Alyssa lowered her eyes back to her notebook, her jaw tight. She could feel the eyes of her classmates on her, some pitying, some amused, some just grateful it wasn't them. She picked up her pen and continued writing, each letter carefully formed, each word a small act of defiance against the chaos trying to claim her. But Brandon wasn't done. He stood up, casual as anything, and stretched. "Think I need to sharpen my pencil," he announced to no one in particular. He walked down the aisle, his footsteps deliberate, and stopped right next to Alyssa's desk. She didn't look up. "What you writing there?" Brandon asked, leaning over her shoulder. His cologne was overpowering, something expensive and aggressive. "Love letters, diary entries about how hard it is being the diversity hire." Alyssa's hand tightened on her pen, but her voice came out level. "Please move." "Please move," Brandon mimicked again, his voice dripping with contempt. "Man, you really don't talk much, do you? What's wrong? Cat got your tongue? Or maybe you just know your place." Mason and Tyler had gotten up now, too, sensing that Brandon was building to something. They flanked him, creating a wall of bodies that blocked Alyssa from the rest of the class. It was practiced, coordinated, they'd done this before. Marissa Chen sat 2 rows back, her phone already out, but held low, the camera aimed at the scene unfolding. Her finger hovered over the record button, her heart pounding. She'd seen Brandon and his crew do this before, had watched them systematically destroy anyone who didn't fit their mold. But something about the way Alyssa sat there, so still and so silent, made Marissa's blood run cold. She hit record. "You know what your problem is," Brandon said, and now there was an edge to his voice, something darker. "You think if you're quiet enough, if you're small enough, we won't notice you. But I see you. And you know what I see? Someone who doesn't belong." He reached down, and before Alyssa could react, grabbed her notebook right off her desk. "Hey!" Alyssa started, finally breaking, finally showing something other than that maddening calm. Brandon held the notebook up, flipping through the pages with exaggerated curiosity. "Wow, look at this. So organized, so neat. You really are trying hard, aren't you?" He looked at Mason and Tyler. "Think she's trying to prove something?" "Definitely," Tyler said, grinning. "Give it back," Alyssa said, standing up now. She was tall, nearly as tall as Brandon, but slender, and in that moment she looked fragile in a way that made the whole room hold its breath. "Give it back," Brandon mimicked one more time. Then his face hardened. "Make me." The classroom was dead silent now. Even Mr. Patterson had stopped writing on the board, his chalk frozen mid-letter, but he didn't turn around. He stood there facing the board, his shoulders tense, a man actively choosing cowardice. Alyssa's hands were shaking now, just slightly, but her voice was steady. "That's my property. Give it back." Brandon looked at the notebook. Then at her, then at the notebook again. Then, with deliberate slowness, he tore out a page. The sound of ripping paper was obscenely loud. He let the page flutter to the ground. Then he tore out another. And another. "Oops," he said, his voice flat and cruel. "Butterfingers." Alyssa lunged for the notebook, but Tyler stepped in front of her, blocking her path. She tried to go around, but Mason was there, their bodies creating a barrier. Brandon continued tearing pages faster now, creating a small storm of paper that drifted to the floor around them like snow. "Stop," Alyssa said, and for the first time her voice cracked. "Please." The please did it. The room erupted in laughter, not everyone, but enough. Enough to make it feel like the whole world was laughing at her, enough to make the humiliation complete. Brandon tore out the last page and then tossed the empty notebook cover at her feet. It landed on top of the pile of torn paper, a small monument to casual cruelty. "There you go," he said, stepping back with his hands spread wide in mock innocence. "All yours." Alyssa stood frozen, looking down at 2 weeks' worth of work scattered across the floor. Her hands were fists at her sides, her breathing rapid but controlled. When she looked up, her eyes swept across the classroom, the laughing faces, the averted gazes, the phones pointed at her recording her humiliation for posterity. Her eyes landed on Mr. Patterson's back. He was still facing the board, still frozen, his cowardice so palpable it had physical weight. Then her eyes found Brandon's, and something passed between them that made his smile falter. It was there and gone in an instant, but Marissa caught it on camera the moment when Brandon Hale, for just a second, saw something in Alyssa Carter's eyes that made him wonder if he'd made a mistake. Alyssa knelt down and began gathering the torn pages, her movements slow and deliberate. She didn't cry. She didn't yell. She carefully collected each piece of paper, smoothing them out, stacking them neatly in her hands. Brandon watched her, and the unease grew. Her silence was wrong somehow. It should have been victory, but it felt like waiting. "Pathetic," he muttered, trying to reclaim the moment. He kicked at the pile of papers, scattering them again. Alyssa stopped. She stayed kneeling, her head bowed, surrounded by the scattered pieces of her work. The bell rang. The class erupted into motion, backpacks, zipping chairs, scraping voices rising in conversation, as if nothing had happened. As if they hadn't just watched someone get torn apart. Brandon, Mason, and Tyler walked out laughing, their voices echoing down the hallway. Mr. Patterson finally turned around, saw Alyssa still kneeling on the floor, and quickly gathered his things. "You should get to your next class," he mumbled, not meeting her eyes, and fled. The room emptied until only 2 people remained. Alyssa still gathering pages and Marissa still recording. Finally, Marissa stood and walked over. She stopped her recording and knelt down beside Alyssa, helping her collect the torn papers. "I got it on video," Marissa said quietly. "All of it. Mr. Patterson's back. Everything." Alyssa really looked at her for the first time. Marissa Chen was petite, with glasses and hair dyed a subtle purple at the tips. She'd never spoken to Alyssa before, had been just another face in the sea of Crestwood students. "Why?" Alyssa asked. "Because someone should see it," Marissa said. "Because this happens all the time and people like Mr. Patterson just let it. Someone needs to see what really goes on here." Alyssa gathered the last few pages and stood. The pile in her hands was ruined, torn edges, footprints, some pages ripped in half. 2 weeks of work destroyed in 2 minutes. "Thank you," Alyssa said softly. Marissa nodded. "What are you going to do?" Alyssa looked down at the destroyed notebook, then toward the door where Brandon and his friends had disappeared, their laughter still echoing faintly from somewhere down the hall. "I don't know yet," she said. But her eyes, those dark, calm eyes that had unsettled Brandon, said something different. They said, "I'm going to wait. I'm going to watch. And when the moment comes, I'm going to make sure you regret this more than anything you've ever done." Marissa saw it too, and she shivered. "You should send that video to the principal," Alyssa said, her voice back to that eerily calm register. "Will you file a report?" Marissa asked. Alyssa shook her head slowly. "Not yet. But keep the video. Something tells me we're going to need it." She walked out of room 207 with her head high, carrying the ruins of her notebook, leaving Marissa standing alone in the empty classroom with a video that would soon change everything. In the hallway, Brandon was at his locker, surrounded by his usual crowd of admirers and hangers-on. He was reenacting the scene, doing an exaggerated impression of Alyssa's voice, and people were eating it up. Alyssa walked past without looking at him, without acknowledging him at all. And that silence, that complete, utter silence, was louder than any insult she could have thrown. Brandon watched her go, and that feeling came back, that unease. Because he'd humiliated her completely, destroyed her work, made her beg in front of the whole class. She should be crying. She should be broken. Instead, she walked like someone who'd just won something. Across the hall, Tyler was already uploading a video to his Instagram shaky phone footage of the notebook being torn, the pages falling Alyssa's face when she said, "Please." The caption read, "New girl learned her place today. Crestwood High, sit down." Within minutes, it had 50 likes. Within an hour, it would have 500. But Marissa's video, the full video, the one that showed Mr. Patterson's cowardice and Brandon's calculated cruelty, sat in her phone waiting. Growing more powerful with every second, it remained unseen. In her next class, Alyssa sat alone again, pulling out a fresh notebook from her backpack. She opened it to the first page and began rewriting her notes from memory, her handwriting as neat and careful as before. But under the desk, hidden from view, her other hand was clenched so tight her knuckles had gone white. She was waiting, and Brandon Hale, laughing in the hallway with his friends, scrolling through the likes on Tyler's video, had no idea that in less than 24 hours, his entire world was going to come crashing down. The storm was gathering. Silent. Patient. Inevitable. And when it finally broke, there would be nowhere for him to hide. The next morning started like any other at Crestwood High, with the usual chaos of teenagers flooding through the front doors, clutching coffee cups and complaining about homework they hadn't done. But underneath the surface, normalcy, something was different. Something was shifting. Marissa's finger had hovered over the post button for 3 hours the night before. She'd sat in her bedroom watching the video again and again. Brandon's smirk, the torn pages falling like snow, Mr. Patterson's cowardly back, and Alyssa's face so carefully blank, even as her world was being ripped apart. At 11:47 p.m., she'd finally done it. She'd uploaded the full 2-minute clip to her TikTok with a simple caption, "This is what happens when money buys silence. This is Crestwood High. Justice for Alyssa." By morning, it had 60,000 views. Alyssa arrived at school to find people staring at her differently, not with the casual dismissal of yesterday, but with something else, recognition, maybe. Discomfort. She walked through the halls with the same quiet dignity, but now she could feel the phones tracking her, could hear the whispers that stopped when she got too close. She didn't know about the video yet. Brandon did, though. He'd woken up to 17 texts from Mason, each one more panicked than the last, all with screenshots of comment sections absolutely destroying him. Tyler had called him at 6 in the morning, his voice high and tight. "Dude, we have a problem, a big problem." But Brandon Hale didn't panic. Brandon Hale didn't lose. He'd dealt with bad press before that time. He'd crashed his BMW into the principal's car and walked away without a scratch that incident at the country club pool that his father had made disappear with a single phone call. This was just another mess that money would clean up. He walked into school with his head high, Mason and Tyler flanking him, like always projecting confidence he didn't quite feel. The stares bothered him more than he wanted to admit. These were his people, his school, his kingdom. They weren't supposed to look at him like that, like he was something ugly they'd found under a rock. "It'll blow over," he muttered to Mason. "By tomorrow everyone will have forgotten about it." Mason didn't look convinced. "Dude, the comments. People are calling for you to be expelled. Someone tagged the school board. Your dad's probably already getting calls." Brandon's jaw tightened. "My dad will handle it. He always does." What Brandon didn't know was that his father was at that very moment sitting in Principal Collins' office, his face red with fury that had nothing to do with shame and everything to do with damaged reputation. Third period came too quickly. History class. Room 207. The scene of the crime. Alyssa walked in and immediately felt the shift in energy. The classroom was packed. Even kids who usually skipped were there, drawn by the drama, like sharks to blood. She took her usual seat, pulled out her new notebook, and tried to ignore the eyes boring into the back of her head. Brandon was already there, sitting in his usual spot, but his posture was different. Tighter, more aggressive. Mason and Tyler sat on either side of him like bodyguards, their faces set in identical scowls. Mr. Patterson walked in looking like he hadn't slept. His eyes were bloodshot, his tie crooked, and when he saw the full classroom, he actually flinched. He'd seen the video, too. Everyone had seen the video, and in it, he was immortalized as exactly what he was, a coward who let money dictate morality. "Everyone settle down," he said, his voice lacking any real authority. "Get out your textbooks. We're continuing our discussion of the Constitutional Convention." Nobody moved to get their textbooks. The room thrummed with tension, waiting for something to break. "I said get out your textbooks," Mr. Patterson repeated louder this time, desperate to impose some kind of order on the chaos he could feel building. Slowly, reluctantly, students started pulling out books, but every eye kept darting between Brandon and Alyssa, waiting. 20 minutes into the class, Mr. Patterson's phone buzzed. He glanced at it, and his face went pale. I have to step out for a moment. There's an emergency faculty meeting. I expect you all to read chapters 12 and 13 quietly until I return." He practically ran out of the room. The door had barely closed before Brandon stood up. "Well," he said loud enough for everyone to hear. "Looks like we're alone." Alyssa didn't look up from her notebook. She kept writing, her pen moving steadily across the page as if Brandon Hale didn't exist at all. And that casual dismissal was what broke him. "Hey," Brandon said, walking toward her desk. "I'm talking to you." Still, Alyssa didn't look up, didn't acknowledge him. Her silence was a weapon, and she wielded it like a blade. "You think you're so smart?" Brandon's voice was rising, now losing that calculated cool. "You think posting some edited video makes you some kind of hero? You're nothing. You're nobody. And when my father's done with you and your little friend who posted that trash, you'll wish you'd never set foot in this school." Alyssa's pen paused. She set it down carefully, precisely. Then she looked up, and her eyes met his with such calm intensity that several students leaned forward, sensing something about to happen. "Are you finished?" she asked quietly. Brandon's hands clenched into fists. "Do you know who I am? Do you know what my family can do to you?" "I know exactly who you are," Alyssa said, still in that maddeningly calm voice. "You're a bully who hides behind his father's money because you have nothing of your own to stand on." The classroom gasped. Nobody talked to Brandon Hale like that. Nobody! Brandon's face went red, then white. "You little—" He grabbed her by the collar of her hoodie and yanked her up out of her seat, slamming her back against the wall. The crack of her body hitting the concrete was sickening. Phones came out immediately, not to help, but to record. Always to record. You need to learn some respect. Brandon hissed, his face inches from hers, his breath hot and angry. And then Alyssa moved. It happened so fast that most people missed it. 1 second, Brandon had her pinned against the wall, and the next, Alyssa's hand had shot up and twisted his wrist in a way that made him yelp and release her. Before he could react, she'd ducked under his arm, stepped behind him, and used his own momentum to flip him over her hip. Brandon Hale, golden boy of Crestwood High, hit the ground hard. The room exploded in noise. Gasps, screams, someone shouting, "Oh my God!" over and over. Phones were everywhere now, capturing every angle, every moment. Brandon lay on the floor, stunned, the wind knocked out of him. But Mason and Tyler were already moving, rushing toward Alyssa with their fists raised. "You're dead," Mason snarled. Alyssa didn't run, didn't back down. She stood her ground, her body shifting into a stance that spoke of training, of discipline, of knowing exactly what she was doing. Mason swung first, a wide haymaker that Alyssa ducked easily. She came up inside his guard and drove her palm into his solar plexus. Mason folded like a lawn chair, gasping for air. Tyler came at her from the side, trying to grab her in a bear hug. Alyssa spun, drove her elbow into his ribs, then swept his legs out from under him. Tyler went down hard, his head bouncing off a desk on the way down. The whole thing took maybe 10 seconds. 3 boys bigger than her, stronger than her, filled with rage and entitlement, were on the ground groaning. And Alyssa stood over them, breathing hard, but controlled her eyes, scanning the room for the next threat. But there was no next threat. Everyone was frozen, phones still recording, mouths still open in shock. Marissa in the back row was recording too, and she was smiling. "Holy shit," someone whispered. "Holy actual shit." Brandon rolled over, clutching his ribs, his face twisted in pain and humiliation. You're insane. You attacked us. Everyone saw it. You're done. You're expelled. I defended myself, Alyssa said calmly. You put your hands on me first. Everyone saw that too. As if on cue, at least 15 phones stopped recording simultaneously. The uploads began immediately. Brandon struggled to his feet, helped up by Mason, who was still wheezing. Tyler stayed down, holding his head. "This isn't over," Brandon said, his voice shaking with rage. "When my father hears about this." "Your father?" A new voice cut through the room. Everyone turned to see Jamal Washington standing in the doorway. He was a senior 6'3" captain of the basketball team, and one of the few students at Crestwood whose family money rivaled the Hales. "Your father's gonna hear about how you got your ass handed to you by a girl half your size. I'm sure that'll go great." A few nervous laughs rippled through the room. Brandon's face went even redder. "Stay out of this, Washington," Brandon spat. Jamal walked into the room, his phone out and recording. "Nah, man, I'm already in it. See, I've been watching you and your boys run this school like your own personal playground for 4 years. And I gotta say, watching karma finally catch up to you, that's beautiful." He looked at Alyssa. "You good?" Alyssa nodded slowly, still wary. She didn't know, Jamal didn't know if this was genuine or just another angle. "Good," Jamal said. Then he looked at his phone and his eyebrows rose. "Oh, damn. Y'all, this is already blowing up. Marissa's video from yesterday hit 100,000 views. The video of what just happened. Someone already posted it, and it's at 20,000. Hashtag Justice for Alyssa is trending in the city." Brandon's eyes widened. No, that's... Delete it. Everyone delete those videos right now." "Or what?" someone called out from the back. "You gonna beat us up too?" More laughter, bolder now. The power dynamic was shifting, the spell breaking. Brandon looked around the room wildly, seeing for the first time what Alyssa had seen from day one. That fear wasn't the same as respect. That loyalty bought with intimidation evaporated the moment the intimidation failed. Footsteps thundered in the hallway. Mr. Patterson burst back into the room, followed by 2 security guards, and Vice Principal Morrison, a stern woman in her 50s, who looked like she'd seen everything and was impressed by nothing. "What is going on in here?" Mr. Patterson demanded, his voice cracking slightly. Everyone started talking at once. Phones were being shoved forward, video evidence being offered up freely. Brandon was shouting about being attacked. Mason and Tyler were nursing their injuries, playing up the pain. Vice Principal Morrison held up her hand, and the room fell silent. Her eyes swept across the scene. 3 boys on the ground, or recovering 1 girl standing calm and collected, and an entire classroom full of witnesses with their phones out. "Everyone sit down and be quiet," she said in a voice that brooked no argument. "You," she pointed at Brandon. You, and you." Mason and Tyler. "Come with me, now." "But she attacked us," Brandon protested. "We're the victims here." "I said now," Morrison snapped. She looked at Alyssa. "You too, Ms. Carter." Alyssa picked up her notebook and walked toward the door with her head high. As she passed Brandon, she heard him whisper low enough that only she could hear, "You're dead. My father is going to bury you." She didn't respond, didn't even look at him. And somehow that was more devastating than any comeback could have been. They were escorted to Principal Collins' office, a journey that felt like a death march. The hallways had cleared, classes were in session, but news of the fight had already spread through the school like wildfire. Principal Collins was a thin, balding man in his late 50s who looked perpetually exhausted by the weight of managing entitled teenagers and their even more entitled parents. His office was exactly what you'd expect degrees on the wall, a desk covered in paperwork, a photo of himself shaking hands with Richard Hale at some charity event prominently displayed. When they walked in, Richard Hale was already there, sitting in one of the chairs like he owned the place, which in many ways he did. Richard Hale was everything his son wanted to be: powerful, commanding, wealthy, in a way that radiated from every pore. His suit probably cost more than most cars. His watch definitely did. He looked at Alyssa with cold, calculating eyes that said he'd already decided she was a problem to be eliminated. "Sit down," Principal Collins said wearily, gesturing to the chairs. Brandon immediately went to his father, who put a hand on his shoulder, not comforting, but possessive. Mason and Tyler sat on the far side. Alyssa sat alone. "Now," Principal Collins began, "I've received several disturbing reports about an altercation in Mr. Patterson's history class. I want to hear from each of you exactly what happened. Mr. Hale, let's start with you." Brandon launched into his story, a carefully crafted lie that painted him as the victim. According to his version, Alyssa had been antagonizing him for days, had threatened him multiple times, and had finally attacked him unprovoked in class. Mason and Tyler corroborated every word, their stories matching too perfectly to be anything but rehearsed. Through it all, Richard Hale watched Alyssa with those cold eyes, a slight smile on his face. He was used to winning. This was just another day at the office for him. When Brandon finished, Principal Collins turned to Alyssa. "Ms. Carter, your version of events." "He grabbed me first," Alyssa said simply. "He slammed me against the wall. I defended myself. There are at least 20 witnesses and probably 30 videos that will confirm exactly what happened." Richard Hale leaned forward. "Principal Collins, I think we all know what's really happening here. This young woman came to Crestwood with a chip on her shoulder, looking for attention, looking to make herself into some kind of martyr." He said the word like it tasted bad. "She provoked my son, then used some kind of martial arts training to attack him and his friends, then claimed self-defense." "That's not—" Alyssa started. "I'm not finished." Richard cut her off with the casual authority of someone used to being obeyed. "My son has a clean record. He's never been in trouble before. Alyssa almost laughed at that, but bit it back. Never been in trouble because trouble got paid off, erased, disappeared. Furthermore, Richard continued, I find it deeply concerning that this school allowed such a violent individual to enroll in the first place. What kind of background checks were performed? Was the administration aware that Ms. Carter had training in hand-to-hand combat? Principal Collins shuffled papers on his desk uncomfortably. Mr. Hale, I assure you, I want her expelled, Richard said flatly. Immediately, today. And I want it on her permanent record that she was removed for violent conduct. I will not have my son attending a school where he's not safe. The irony was so thick you could choke on it. Alyssa felt her control starting to slip, felt the anger she'd been holding back threatening to break through. But before she could speak, her phone buzzed in her pocket. Once, twice, 3 times, 4. Principal Collins was talking, saying something about procedures and investigations, but Richard Hale was already standing up, already moving to end this conversation on his terms. I expect to hear that this situation has been resolved by the end of the day, Richard said. Or perhaps we need to discuss whether Crestwood High is truly the best recipient of the Hale Foundation's continued financial support. There it was, the threat. The reminder of who really held the power. Principal Collins' face went pale. Mr. Hale, let's not be hasty. I'm sure we can... A knock on the door interrupted him. Vice Principal Morrison stuck her head in. Sir, I'm sorry to interrupt, but you need to see this. Now. She came in holding an iPad, her face grave. She pulled up TikTok and turned it so everyone could see. Marissa's original video had exploded. 400,000 views and climbing. But it wasn't alone anymore. There were compilation videos now. Videos from multiple angles of the fight. Videos with commentary. Videos breaking down Brandon's history of bullying put together by students who'd finally found their courage. And they were all tagged with #JusticeForAlyssa. It gets worse, Morrison said grimly. She swiped to Twitter. The local news stations had picked it up. Channel 7 News had posted a story, Violence and Privilege at Elite High School. Channel 4 had run with, Viral Video Exposes Bullying Culture. Richard Hale's face went from confident to calculating in an instant. This wasn't a problem money could make disappear quietly. This was public. This was spreading. That video is defamatory, he said quickly. It's been edited to, there are 17 different videos from 17 different angles, Morrison interrupted. They all show the same thing. Brandon initiated physical contact. Ms. Carter defended herself. Principal Collins looked like he might throw up. Brandon's face had gone white. Dad, she attacked me. You have to believe me. But Richard Hale wasn't looking at his son. He was looking at his phone, which had started buzzing insistently. When he glanced at the screen, his jaw tightened. I need to take this, he said, standing abruptly. He walked out of the office already talking in low, urgent tones. The room fell silent, except for the sound of Richard's muffled voice through the door growing more agitated by the second. Alyssa sat perfectly still, her hands folded in her lap, while the world shifted around her. She could feel it happening, the tide turning, the narrative changing, justice creeping closer. When Richard came back 5 minutes later, his face was a mask of barely controlled fury. We're leaving, he told Brandon curtly. But Dad, now! Brandon scrambled to his feet, followed by Mason and Tyler. As they headed for the door, Richard turned back to Principal Collins. You and I will be having a very serious conversation about how this school is run. Very serious. It was a threat, but it rang hollow now. Everyone in that room could feel his power slipping. When they were gone, Principal Collins slumped in his chair. He looked at Alyssa for a long moment, and she could see him doing the calculation, the hail money versus the public outcry, his job security versus doing what was right. "Ms. Carter," he finally said, "you're free to go back to class. We'll be conducting a full investigation into this incident." Alyssa stood. "And what about the video from yesterday? The one where I was harassed and my property was destroyed while Mr. Patterson did nothing?" Principal Collins flinched. "That will be part of the investigation as well." "Will it?" Alyssa asked quietly. "Or will that disappear like everything else that's inconvenient for the people who write checks to this school?" She didn't wait for an answer. She walked out, leaving Principal Collins sitting in his office drowning in the realization that the old playbook wasn't working anymore. In the hallway, Alyssa finally pulled out her phone and checked her messages. They were from numbers she didn't recognize, messages from people all over the city who'd seen the videos, who were sharing her story, who were standing up and saying, "Enough." One message stood out. It was from an address she didn't know. "Ms. Carter, my name is Clara Jensen. I'm an investigative journalist with the City Tribune. I'd very much like to speak with you about what's been happening at Crestwood High. I think there's a much bigger story here than just a schoolyard fight." Alyssa stared at the message for a long moment. Then she typed back, "I'm listening." She hit send and walked back toward her classroom where the whispers would follow her, where the phones would track her every move. But this time, she wasn't alone. This time, the whole city was watching, and the storm that had been gathering for so long was finally about to break wide open. Clara Jensen arrived at the small coffee shop 3 blocks from Crestwood High exactly 15 minutes early, which was her standard practice for interviews that mattered. She was a woman in her early 40s, with sharp eyes behind black-rimmed glasses and the kind of persistent energy that had earned her 2 Pulitzer nominations and a reputation for taking down people who thought they were untouchable. She ordered a black coffee, claimed a corner booth with a view of the door, and pulled out her tablet, scrolling through the research her team had compiled over the last 8 hours. Richard Hale's file was thick. Real estate mogul, philanthropist, board member of 6 major corporations. But underneath the glossy surface, Clara's instincts were screaming. The donations to Crestwood High were substantial, yes, but they'd increased dramatically over the last 3 years, right around the time the school board had voted to relax certain disciplinary standards. Coincidence? Clara didn't believe in coincidences. She was deep in a financial report when the bell above the door chimed. A tall black woman in her late 30s walked in, moving with the kind of controlled precision that Clara recognized immediately military bearing. She was followed by a younger version of herself. Same dark eyes, same quiet intensity. Alyssa Carter and her mother. Clara stood extending her hand. "Ms. Carter, I'm Clara Jensen." The older woman's handshake was firm, assessing. "Lieutenant Colonel Jasmine Carter, this is my daughter Alyssa." Clara's eyebrows rose slightly. "Lieutenant Colonel." That explained where Alyssa had learned to handle herself. "Thank you both for meeting with me. Please sit." They settled into the booth, Jasmine positioning herself, so she could see both the door and the window's tactical awareness that never really left you, Clara supposed. Alyssa sat quietly, her hands folded on the table, watching Clara with those unsettlingly calm eyes that had unnerved Brandon Hale. "Before we start," Jasmine said, her voice carrying the authority of someone used to being obeyed, "I want to be clear about something. My daughter is a minor. Anything we discuss here is off the record, unless I explicitly state otherwise. Are we understood?" Clara nodded, respecting the boundary. Absolutely. For now, I'm just trying to understand what's really happening at Crestwood High. The videos that have gone viral are disturbing, but I suspect they're just the tip of the iceberg. You suspect correctly, Jasmine said. She pulled out her own phone and slid it across the table. On the screen was a spreadsheet: incidents, reported incidents, investigated incidents, resolved. The pattern was damning. I pulled these from the school's public records. Do you notice anything interesting? Clara scanned the data, her journalist's brain immediately catching the anomaly. Incident reports drop off dramatically whenever they involve students from the top donor families. Specifically, Jasmine said, they disappear entirely when they involve Brandon Hale Mason Torres or Tyler Chen. 3 boys. 15 reported incidents over the last 2 years. 0 disciplinary actions. Alyssa spoke for the first time, her voice quiet but steady. It's not just them. There's a whole system. If your parents donate enough, you're basically untouchable. And everyone knows it. The teachers know it. The administration knows it. Even the students know it. Clara was typing notes rapidly on her tablet. Have you filed a formal complaint with the school board? We tried, Jasmine said, and there was steel in her voice now. This morning, we were told that the matter was under review and that Principal Collins would handle it internally. I was also politely informed that making waves could affect Alyssa's standing at the school. She leaned forward. Ms. Jensen, I've served 3 tours overseas. I've faced down insurgents and bureaucratic corruption in war zones, and I'm telling you what I'm seeing at Crestwood High is the same damn thing, power protecting power, while everyone else suffers. Clara studied the woman across from her, seeing the controlled fury of a mother who'd watched her daughter be systematically targeted and then blamed for defending herself. What do you want to happen here? I want the truth to come out, Jasmine said simply. All of it. I want people to see that this isn't just about a fight in a classroom. It's about a system that's fundamentally broken. Mom, Alyssa said softly, touching her mother's arm. There was a question in her eyes, an uncertainty that Clara recognized the fear of making things worse, of becoming even more of a target. Jasmine covered her daughter's hand with her own. Baby, I know you're scared, but we don't back down from bullies. We never have. And we're not starting now. Clara's phone buzzed. She glanced at it, and her eyes widened. I need to show you something. This just came through from my research team. She turned her tablet around so they could see. Richard Hale's foundation donations to Crestwood High total about $2 million over the last 3 years. Generous, certainly, but not unusual for someone of his wealth. Then what's the problem? Alyssa asked. The problem, Clara said, pulling up another document, is where that money is coming from. My team started digging into the Hale Foundation's finances, and they found some very interesting transactions. Large cash deposits with no clear source. Money flowing in from overseas accounts. Shell corporations that don't seem to actually produce anything. Jasmine's eyes narrowed. You're saying the donations are dirty money? I'm saying it looks like money laundering, Clara corrected. I can't prove it yet, but if Richard Hale has been using his charitable foundation to wash dirty money, and if Crestwood High has been knowingly accepting those donations and protecting his son in exchange. She let the implication hang in the air. That's a criminal conspiracy, Jasmine finished. That's a story that could bring down more than just a bully, Clara said. She looked at Alyssa. But I need more. I need evidence. I need witnesses willing to go on record. Can you help me with that? Alyssa was quiet for a long moment, thinking about Marissa, about Jamal, about all the other students who'd been recording and posting, and finally finding their voices. I think so, she said slowly. But we have to move fast. Richard Hale is already trying to control the narrative. By tomorrow, he'll have his version of the story planted in every newspaper that matters. Then we don't wait until tomorrow, Clara said, a fierce smile crossing her face. We break this story tonight. But breaking the story would prove more complicated than any of them anticipated, because Richard Hale wasn't just rich, he was connected. And he was already making his moves. That same afternoon, Principal Collins called an emergency assembly. The entire student body packed into the auditorium, buzzing with speculation and excitement. The videos had been shared so widely that even freshmen who'd never exchanged a word with Alyssa knew her name. Brandon, Mason, and Tyler were noticeably absent. Principal Collins took the stage looking like a man who'd aged 10 years in the last 24 hours. Students, faculty, thank you for gathering on such short notice. I want to address the incidents that occurred yesterday and today, incidents which have understandably caused a great deal of concern and disruption. Marissa, sitting near the back with her phone already recording, whispered to the girl next to her. Here comes the cover-up. Principal Collins cleared his throat. First, I want to assure you all that Crestwood High takes bullying and violence very seriously. We have a zero-tolerance policy for physical altercations, and all students involved in today's incident will face appropriate consequences. A murmur rippled through the crowd. All students involved. That meant Alyssa, too. Jamal Washington stood up, his tall frame impossible to miss. Principal Collins, with all due respect, are you seriously trying to both sides this? We all saw the videos. Brandon Hale assaulted Alyssa Carter. She defended herself. Those aren't the same thing. Mr. Washington, please sit down. No. Jamal's voice carried across the auditorium. I'm tired of sitting down. We're all tired of sitting down while you protect the kids whose parents write checks. Brandon and his crew have been terrorizing people for years, and you've done nothing. Nothing. And now that someone finally stood up to them, you want to punish her too. The auditorium erupted in applause and shouting. Principal Collins tried to regain control, but the students had found their voice, and they weren't willing to be silenced anymore. A sophomore girl stood up, her voice shaking but determined. Brandon threw my books in the trash last year and called me a slur. I reported it. Nothing happened. Another student, Tyler Chen, cheated off my test, and when I told the teacher, I was the one who got in trouble for not covering my answers. More students standing now, more stories pouring out, years of accumulated injustice, finally finding release. The adults in the room, teachers, administrators, sat frozen, watching their carefully maintained fiction crumble in real time. In the back of the auditorium, Mr. Rodriguez, the physics teacher, stood up. He was a young teacher, only in his 3rd year, and he'd been quiet up until now. But something in the moment moved him. I have security camera footage, he said, his voice cutting through the chaos. From the hallways, the classrooms, 7 different angles from yesterday and today, everything. And I've already made copies and sent them to the school board, the superintendent, and the local news stations. Principal Collins' face went white. Mr. Rodriguez, that footage is school property. You had no authorization. I had an obligation, Rodriguez interrupted. To protect students, to tell the truth. I'm done watching kids suffer because we're all too afraid of losing our jobs. The auditorium erupted again, and this time Principal Collins didn't even try to restore order. He simply walked off the stage, a defeated man. While chaos reigned at Crestwood High, Richard Hale sat in his downtown office 53 floors above the city making phone calls. His first call was to his lawyer, Malcolm Brenner, one of the most expensive defense attorneys money could buy. Malcolm, I need you to make some things disappear, Richard said without preamble. On the other end of the line, Malcolm Brenner sighed. He'd been expecting this call since the videos started going viral. Richard, I've looked at the footage. Your son assaulted that girl. There are multiple witnesses. This isn't something we can make disappear. Everything can disappear with enough money, Richard snapped. That's what I pay you for. What you pay me for is legal advice, Malcolm said carefully. And my advice is to have Brandon issue a public apology, make a donation to an anti-bullying charity, and hope this blows over. Absolutely not. That would be an admission of guilt. Richard, your son is guilty. The only question is how much worse you're going to make it by fighting this. Richard ended the call and immediately dialed another number. This one was answered by a voice he didn't recognize, female professional. Mr. Hale, I'm afraid Superintendent Williams is in a meeting right now. Get him out of the meeting, Richard said coldly. Tell him it's regarding the Hale Foundation's annual contribution to the district. All $7 million of it. There was a pause then. Please hold. 2 minutes later, Superintendent Williams picked up his voice, carefully neutral. Richard, good to hear from you. How can I help? You can start by explaining why my son is being crucified in the media while that violent girl who attacked him is being treated like some kind of hero. Richard, I've seen the footage, from multiple angles. Your son initiated physical contact. That's not in dispute. Then the footage is wrong, or edited, or taken out of context. Richard was pacing, now his city view forgotten. I want that girl expelled. I want it done today, and I want a public statement from the district condemning her actions. Superintendent Williams was quiet for a long moment. I can't do that, Richard. Can't or won't. Both. The optics alone would destroy us. Social media is calling for your son's expulsion. Parents are demanding investigations. If I punish the victim and protect the aggressor, especially given the racial dynamics involved, the district would be sued into oblivion. Then I'm withdrawing my foundation's support, Richard said flatly. Effective immediately. $7 million gone. How will your budget look then, David? Another pause. When Superintendent Williams spoke again, his voice was harder. You know what, Richard, do it. Withdraw your money. Because I'm not going to destroy this district's integrity for a bribe. We're done here. The line went dead. Richard stared at his phone in disbelief. Nobody hung up on Richard Hale. Nobody. His phone rang almost immediately, his accountant sounding panicked. Mr. Hale, we have a problem. The Tribune is running a story tonight about the foundation's finances. They're asking questions about the offshore accounts. Richard's blood ran cold. What kind of questions? The kind that require answers we can't give. Sir, if they start digging into the Cayman transfers, if they connect the dots to the construction deals in Malaysia— Shut it down, Richard interrupted. Call their editor, threaten to sue, kill the story. I tried. The editor said they have multiple sources and documentation. The story runs at 6. Richard looked at his watch. It was 4:47. He had just over an hour before his carefully constructed empire started crumbling. At 6:03 p.m., Clara Jensen's story went live on the Tribune's website. The headline read, Money, Power, and Corruption Inside the Scandal at Crestwood High. The article was devastating. It detailed not just the bullying incident, but the pattern of protection for wealthy students, the suspicious financial transactions in Richard Hale's foundation, and most damning of all, testimony from former school employees who'd been fired for trying to hold powerful students accountable. By 6:30, it had been shared 10,000 times. By 7 Huzurus, local news trucks were parked outside both Crestwood High and Richard Hale's office building. By 8 Huzurus, it was the lead story on every local news channel. At 9:15 p.m., Alyssa's phone rang. It was a number she didn't recognize, but something made her answer. Ms. Carter. The voice was male, older, unfamiliar. My name is Detective Marcus Shaw. I'm with the Financial Crimes Division. I'm calling because we're opening a formal investigation into Richard Hale and the Hale Foundation. I was wondering if you and your mother might be willing to come in and give a statement about your experiences at Crestwood High. Alyssa looked at her mother, who was watching the news coverage with an expression of grim satisfaction. Detective Shaw, can you hold on just a moment? She covered the phone and told her mother about the call. Jasmine's eyes lit up. Tell him we'll be there first thing tomorrow morning. The next week was a blur of activity. The school board announced a full independent investigation into Crestwood High's disciplinary practices. Principal Collins was placed on administrative leave. Mr. Patterson resigned before he could be fired. 3 other teachers came forward with testimony about being pressured to give preferential treatment to wealthy students. Richard Hale hired a crisis management team and issued a statement denying all allegations of financial impropriety, but the damage was done. 2 of his business partners quietly severed ties. The charity board that oversaw his foundation called for his resignation. His wife Brandon's mother moved out of their estate and filed for separation. And through it all, the hashtag kept growing. Justice. For Alyssa had evolved into something bigger, a movement demanding accountability, demanding that schools protect all students equally, demanding that money stop buying immunity from consequences. The disciplinary hearing was set for 3 weeks after the initial incident, but it had transformed from a simple school matter into something resembling a trial. The school board decided to hold it in the city courthouse in a hearing room that could accommodate the media presence. Lawyers were involved now. Everything was being recorded. This wasn't just about Alyssa and Brandon anymore. It was about whether the system could be forced to change. Alyssa sat at a table with her mother on one side and Clara Jensen on the other, acting as an advocate. Across the aisle sat Brandon, flanked by his father, and Malcolm Brenner. Brandon looked smaller, somehow diminished. The confident swagger was gone, replaced by a hunted look that darted around the room constantly. The panel consisted of 3 school board members, the district superintendent, and a retired judge brought in to ensure procedural fairness. The lead board member, Dr. Patricia Monroe, called the hearing to order at exactly 9:00 a.m. This hearing has been convened to address allegations of bullying assault and systemic failures in addressing student safety at Crestwood High School, Dr. Monroe began. We will hear testimony from all involved parties, review evidence, and make determinations regarding both individual disciplinary actions and broader policy reforms. Malcolm Brenner stood immediately. Before we begin, I'd like to enter a motion to close these proceedings to the press. My client is a minor, and his privacy rights. Motion denied. The retired judge. Judge Harriet Chen said curtly. The public interest in these proceedings outweighs privacy concerns, particularly given the extensive media coverage already in the public domain. Proceed, Dr. Monroe. Richard Hale's jaw clenched, but he said nothing. The next 4 hours were excruciating. Witness after witness took the stand, students who testified about Brandon's history of bullying teachers who admitted to looking the other way, administrators who detailed the pressure they'd faced to protect certain students. Marissa presented her videos, which were played on large screens for everyone to see. Mr. Rodriguez showed his security footage 7 different angles, showing exactly what had happened. When it was Brandon's turn to testify, Malcolm Brenner had clearly coached him extensively. Brandon spoke in a monotone reading from prepared notes, claiming he'd been provoked, claiming he'd felt threatened, claiming everything except responsibility. But then Judge Chen asked him a simple question. Mr. Hale, why did you tear up Ms. Carter's notebook the day before the physical altercation? Brandon froze. That hadn't been in the script. I don't. We have video of that incident as well, Judge Chen said. Multiple videos. They show you deliberately destroying her property while she asked you to stop. Why did you do that?" The room was silent. Richard Hale leaned over to whisper something to Malcolm, but Judge Chen held up her hand. "Mr. Hale, your son is under oath. Let him answer." Brandon's hands were shaking. He looked at his father, at the judge, at the cameras, at Alyssa sitting calm and still across the room. And something broke. "Because I could," he whispered. "Speak up, please," Judge Chen said. "Because I could." Brandon's voice cracked. "Because I've been doing whatever I want my whole life and nobody ever stops me. Because my dad always fixes everything and makes problems go away. Because that's what happens when you're rich. You can do whatever you want. And there's never any consequences." Richard Hale stood up. "Brandon, stop talking. Right now." But Brandon was crying now, years of pressure and privilege and poison finally bursting out. "You told me that weak people don't matter. You told me that money is power and power is everything. You told me to dominate or be dominated. So that's what I did. I dominated everyone I could because that's what you wanted." "Sit down, Mr. Hale," Judge Chen ordered Richard, who was moving toward his son. "You made me into this," Brandon shouted at his father. "I didn't want to be this person, but you said I had to be strong, had to be ruthless, had to prove I was worthy of the Hale name. And when I tried to be nice, when I tried to have friends who weren't just using me for money, you said I was being weak." The courtroom was dead silent except for Brandon's ragged breathing. "Brandon," Malcolm said quietly, "I strongly advise you to stop talking." But Brandon had gone past the point of listening to advice. He turned to Alyssa, tears streaming down his face. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice breaking. "I'm so sorry. You didn't deserve any of that. You were just trying to exist, and I tried to destroy you because I'm everything you said I am. I'm nothing without my father's money, nothing." Alyssa looked at him for a long moment. This boy who'd terrorized her, who'd tried to break her, who was now breaking himself in front of the world. And she felt something unexpected. Not sympathy exactly, but a recognition of shared humanity, a glimpse of the person he might have been in a different life. "I accept your apology," she said quietly. The hearing ended shortly after that. The panel deliberated for 2 hours, while everyone waited in separate rooms. When they returned, Dr. Monroe read the findings with a grave expression. Brandon was expelled from Crestwood High and mandated to attend a therapeutic boarding school program that specialized in behavioral intervention. Mason and Tyler received suspensions and probation, but more significantly, the panel announced a complete overhaul of Crestwood's disciplinary policies, the implementation of mandatory anti-bullying training for all staff, and the creation of an independent student advocacy board. Principal Collins's resignation was accepted. Mr. Patterson was barred from teaching in the district. And the panel made a formal referral to the district attorney's office regarding Richard Hale's financial activities. As they filed out of the courthouse, reporters swarmed them. Alyssa, prepared, this time stopped at the microphone cluster that had been set up. "I want to say something," she said, her voice steady despite the dozens of cameras pointed at her. "This was never about revenge. This was about making sure that what happened to me doesn't keep happening to other students. Rich or poor, black or white, everyone deserves to feel safe at school. Everyone deserves to be treated with dignity, and no amount of money should buy someone the right to hurt others without consequences." A reporter shouted a question. "Alyssa, do you think Brandon deserves a second chance?" Alyssa thought about the broken boy in the courtroom finally seeing past his father's shadow. "I think everyone deserves a chance to change. But change requires consequences first. You can't heal what you won't acknowledge." But Jasmine put her arm around her daughter's shoulders, and together they walked through the crowd of reporters toward their car, leaving behind a courthouse full of people who'd just witnessed something rare, the powerful being held accountable by the powerless. 3 days later, federal agents raided Richard Hale's office. The charges included money laundering, tax evasion, and fraud. The empire he'd built over decades began to collapse in hours. And in a therapeutic boarding school 3 states away, Brandon Hale sat in a small room with a counselor, finally beginning the hard work of figuring out who he was without his father's money to hide behind. The morning sun filtered through the tall windows of Crestwood High's main hallway, casting long shadows across the polished floors. It had been 6 weeks since the hearing, and the school felt different now, like a house that had been fumigated, the poison finally clearing from the air. Alyssa walked through those halls with her head high, no longer trying to disappear, no longer needing to. The new principal, Dr. Marcus Webb, had arrived 3 weeks ago with a reputation for running a tight ship and zero tolerance for inequality. He was a tall black man in his 50s who'd turned around 2 failing schools in Chicago, and he'd made it clear from day one that Crestwood's old way of doing business was dead and buried. On his first day, he'd removed the donor plaques from the walls, all of them. "When I look at these halls," he'd said in his first assembly, "I want to see students, not advertisements for who paid the most." The changes were visible everywhere. New reporting protocols had been implemented with anonymous tip lines and mandatory investigations for every complaint. The Student Advocacy Board that the hearing panel had ordered was up and running, led by Marissa Chen and Jamal Washington. And perhaps most significantly, the culture was shifting. Students who'd once been silent were finding their voices, knowing now that those voices would be heard. But for Alyssa, the biggest change was internal. She no longer sat alone at lunch. Marissa had claimed the seat next to her on the second day back, and soon others had joined, students who'd been marginalized, students who'd witnessed the transformation and wanted to be part of building something better. They called themselves the Justice League, half joking, half serious, a group dedicated to making sure what had happened to Alyssa never happened to anyone else. On this particular morning, Alyssa was heading to Dr. Webb's office. He'd called her in the night before, saying there was something important he needed to discuss. She found him at his desk, reading through a stack of papers, his reading glasses perched on his nose. "Ms. Carter, thank you for coming," he said, gesturing to a chair. "Please sit." Alyssa settled into the chair, curious and slightly nervous. Dr. Webb had been nothing but supportive, but old habits died hard. Being called to the principal's office still triggered a flutter of anxiety. Dr. Webb took off his glasses and looked at her with those kind, serious eyes. "I wanted to talk to you about next month's flag ceremony. As you know, we're planning to make it a significant event, the official launch of our new Students for Students anti-violence program. I'd like you to speak." Alyssa blinked. "Speak in front of the whole school." "In front of the whole school, the school board, the media, and community leaders," Dr. Webb confirmed. "This program exists because of you, Alyssa. Because you had the courage to stand up when standing up seemed impossible. These students need to hear from you. They need to hear that change is possible, that their voices matter, that silence isn't the only option." "I don't know what I'd say," Alyssa said quietly. The thought of standing in front of all those people, cameras and phones recording every word, made her stomach twist. "You'll know," Dr. Webb said with quiet confidence. "When the moment comes, you'll know. Think about it. You don't have to decide right now. But Alyssa," he leaned forward, "you've already done the hard part. Speaking truth to power when everything was against you, that took real courage. Speaking to people who are already listening, that's just sharing what you've learned." Alyssa nodded slowly, the weight of the request settling on her shoulders. "I'll think about it. That's all I ask." Dr. Webb smiled. "Now I believe you have AP English in 5 minutes. Better not be late. Ms. Rodriguez has a reputation to maintain." Alyssa left the office with her mind churning. The thought of public speaking terrified her in ways that defending herself against Brandon never had. Physical confrontation had rules, had instinct, had training. But standing on a stage, vulnerable and exposed, trying to put into words the journey she'd been on, that was different. That required a different kind of courage. That evening, Alyssa sat at the kitchen table with her mother picking at her dinner. Jasmine watched her daughter with the patient attention of someone who'd spent years reading the moods of soldiers under her command. "You've been quiet all evening," Jasmine observed. "Even more than usual. What's on your mind?" Alyssa told her about Dr. Webb's request. When she finished, she looked up to find her mother studying her with an expression that mixed pride with understanding. "You're scared," Jasmine said. It wasn't a question. "Terrified," Alyssa admitted. "What if I mess it up? What if I can't find the words? What if you're exactly what those kids need to hear?" Jasmine interrupted gently. She reached across the table and took her daughter's hand. "Baby, you know what I learned in the military? The bravest soldiers weren't the ones who never felt fear. They were the ones who felt it and did what needed to be done anyway." She squeezed Alyssa's hand. "You've already proven you have that kind of courage. This is just another form of battle." "It doesn't feel the same," Alyssa said. "Because it's not," Jasmine agreed. "It's harder. Fighting back against someone attacking you, that's instinct, that's survival. But standing up in front of people and making yourself vulnerable, sharing your pain and your strength, that's a choice. That's leadership." She paused. "Did I ever tell you about the first time I had to give a speech to my battalion?" Alyssa shook her head. "I threw up twice before I went on stage," Jasmine said with a wry smile. "I was convinced I'd forget every word, that I'd embarrass myself and lose their respect. But you know what happened. I got up there, looked at all those faces, and I remembered why I was there. Not for me. For them. For the soldiers who needed to hear that their CO understood them, believed in them, would fight for them." She met her daughter's eyes. "You're not speaking for yourself, Alyssa. You're speaking for every kid who's been bullied, who's been silenced, who's been told they don't matter. That makes it easier. And harder. But mostly, it makes it necessary." Over the next 3 weeks, Alyssa worked on her speech. She wrote and rewrote, threw away entire drafts, started over. Marissa helped offering suggestions and encouragement. Jamal sat through practice runs giving honest feedback. Even Clara Jensen stopped by offering the perspective of someone who'd spent her career finding the right words to expose truth. "Don't overthink it," Clara advised during one session. "The most powerful speeches aren't the most polished ones. They're the most honest ones. Just tell your truth." The night before the ceremony, Alyssa couldn't sleep. She lay in bed staring at the ceiling, running through her speech for the 100th time. Around midnight, her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. Her first instinct was to delete it. She'd gotten plenty of hate messages over the weeks, people who thought she'd destroyed Brandon's life. People who resented her for challenging the status quo. But something made her open it. The message was short. "Ms. Carter, this is Brandon. I know I probably have no right to contact you. I know my lawyer told me not to, but I wanted you to know something before tomorrow. What you did, standing up, fighting back, refusing to be silent, it saved my life. I don't mean that dramatically. I mean it literally. I was becoming a monster and I didn't even see it. You held up a mirror and forced me to look. I'm in therapy now, real therapy, and I'm starting to understand who I am without my father's money, without the armor I'd built up. I'm starting to become someone I don't hate. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't deserve it. But I wanted to say thank you. You were stronger than me in every way that mattered. I hope your speech tomorrow changes lives the way your courage changed mine." Alyssa read the message 3 times, emotions warring inside her. Anger was still there. She hadn't forgotten the torn notebook, the humiliation, the fear. But beneath it was something else. Recognition, maybe. Hope that people could change, that the cycle of hurt could be broken. She didn't reply, didn't know what she'd say if she did. But she saved the message. The morning of the ceremony dawned clear and bright. The school had transformed the front courtyard into a proper venue, a stage with a podium, rows of chairs for attendees, a sound system that would carry voices across the gathered crowd. By 10 o'clock, people were already arriving. Students, teachers, parents, school board members in their formal attire, reporters with cameras and microphones, community leaders who'd been following the story, and survivors people who'd reached out to Alyssa over the weeks, sharing their own stories of bullying, thanking her for giving them hope. Alyssa stood backstage with her mother watching the crowd grow. Her hands were shaking. She'd changed clothes 3 times that morning, finally settling on a simple navy dress that her mother had helped her pick out. Professional, but not pretentious. Strong, but not aggressive. "You ready?" Jasmine asked, straightening her daughter's collar with the practiced efficiency of a military officer. "No," Alyssa said honestly. "But I'm going to do it anyway." Jasmine smiled, pride shining in her eyes. "That's my girl." Dr. Webb took the stage first, welcoming everyone and explaining the significance of the day. He spoke about the journey Crestwood High had been, on the hard truths they'd faced, the changes they'd implemented. "But this isn't just about policy changes and new protocols," he said, his voice carrying across the courtyard. "It's about culture. It's about making sure that every student who walks through our doors knows they matter, that they're safe, that they have a voice." He introduced the Student Advocacy Board, and Marissa and Jamal came forward to present the framework for the Students for Students program. They spoke about peer support systems, about conflict resolution training, about creating spaces where students could report concerns without fear of retaliation. The crowd applauded, but Alyssa could barely hear it over the pounding of her heart. Then Dr. Webb was saying her name. "And now I'd like to invite to the stage the young woman who started this transformation, a student who showed us all what real courage looks like, Alyssa Carter." The applause was thunderous. Alyssa walked onto the stage on legs that felt like they might give out at any moment. The crowd was massive, hundreds of faces looking up at her phones, recording cameras flashing. For a moment, the old instinct kicked in, the urge to shrink, to disappear, to be anything but the center of attention. But then she saw her mother in the front row, standing and clapping with tears streaming down her face. She saw Marissa and Jamal grinning and giving her thumbs up. She saw students from Crestwood, some she knew, and many she didn't, all watching her with expressions of hope and expectation. She reached the podium, gripped its edges to steady herself, and looked out at the sea of faces. The speech she'd memorized vanished from her mind completely. Every carefully crafted sentence, every practiced transition gone. So she spoke from her heart instead. "I'm not good at public speaking," she began, her voice shaking slightly. "I'm not good at being the center of attention. For most of my life, I've tried to be invisible. Small, quiet, because I thought that was how you survived, by not making waves, by not drawing notice, by accepting whatever treatment came your way and just enduring it." She paused, gathering herself. The crowd was absolutely silent. "But I learned something these past 2 months. Silence doesn't protect you. It protects the people who hurt you. When we stay quiet about bullying, about injustice, about systems that favor the powerful over the powerless, we're not keeping ourselves safe. We're giving permission for the abuse to continue." Her voice was getting stronger now, the fear burning away in the heat of truth. I didn't want to be a symbol. I didn't want to be a hashtag, or a viral video, or a news story. I just wanted to go to school, learn, and be left alone. But sometimes life doesn't give you what you want. Sometimes it gives you what you need. And what I needed was to learn that I had strength I didn't know I possessed. Not just physical strength, though my mother did teach me how to defend myself. A ripple of laughter went through the crowd. But the strength to stand up, to speak out, to refuse to accept that money and power means some people get to hurt others without consequences. She looked directly at the cameras, now knowing her words would travel beyond this courtroom, beyond this city. If you're watching this and you're being bullied, I see you. If you're scared to speak up because you think no one will believe you because the person hurting you has more money or more friends or more power, I believe you. And I'm telling you right now that your silence is not weakness, but your voice. Your voice is power. They can't buy, can't suppress, can't destroy. Alyssa's hands had stopped shaking. She felt anchored now, connected to something larger than herself. I want to talk about forgiveness for a moment, because I know some people think I should hate Brandon Hale. That I should want revenge, want to see him suffer the way he made me suffer. But here's what I've learned. Forgiveness isn't about letting someone off the hook. It's about refusing to let their actions define your future. It's about breaking the cycle of hurt. She thought about the text message from the night before, about a broken boy trying to rebuild himself. Brandon wrote to me recently. He apologized. And you know what? I believe he meant it. Not because what he did was okay, it wasn't. Not because he doesn't deserve consequences, he does. But because I've seen what happens when we refuse to believe people can change. We create a world where change becomes impossible. Where one mistake, one moment of cruelty defines someone forever. She paused. I'm not saying forget. I'm not saying trust blindly. But I am saying that if we want to build a better world, we have to leave room for people to become better versions of themselves. The crowd was hanging on every word now. Even the reporters had lowered their cameras, just listening. The program we're launching today, Students for Students, it's not just about stopping bullies. It's about creating a culture where bullying can't thrive, where students look out for each other, where speaking up is expected, not exceptional, where no one has to choose between their safety and their education. Alyssa's voice dropped, became more intimate, as if she was speaking to each person individually. My mother taught me something when I was little. She said strength is not about how hard you can hit. It's about what you can take and still stand up, still move forward, still fight for what's right. I thought I understood that. But I didn't. Not really. Not until I stood in a classroom with torn pages of my notebook scattered around my feet, with everyone watching, with cameras recording my humiliation, and I had to make a choice. She looked out at the crowd, at all those faces watching her. I could have stayed down, could have accepted that this was just how things were, that people like Brandon got to do whatever they wanted, and people like me just had to take it. But I stood up. Not because I was brave, I was terrified, but because staying down felt like dying a little bit, and I chose to live, fully, loudly, unapologetically. The courtyard was so quiet, you could hear the wind rustling through the trees that lined the perimeter. So here's what I want to say to every student here, every student watching online, every kid who's ever felt powerless. You are not powerless. You are not alone. And your voice, your true, authentic, courageous voice, that's the most powerful weapon against injustice that exists. Use it, even when it shakes. Especially when it shakes. She gripped the podium one last time. This school failed me. The system failed me. Adults who should have protected me chose money over morality. But students, Students showed up. Students recorded. Students spoke out. Students demanded better. And that's what changed everything. Not lawyers or journalists or investigations, though those helped. What changed everything was ordinary people refusing to accept that wrong was right, just because someone powerful said it was. Alyssa took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the moment. I'm not a hero. I'm just a girl who got tired of being quiet. But if my story helps one person find their voice, if it gives one student the courage to speak up, if it makes one bully think twice, then every terrible moment was worth it. She stepped back from the podium, her speech finished. For a heartbeat, there was complete silence. Then the courtyard erupted. People stood applauding, some crying, some cheering. The sound was overwhelming, a wave of affirmation and support that washed over her. Alyssa walked off the stage into her mother's arms. Jasmine held her tight, whispering in her ear, "You just changed the world, baby. You just changed the world." The rest of the ceremony passed in a blur. More speeches, the official launch of the program, students signing up to be peer advocates. But what Alyssa would remember most was the line of people who waited to talk to her afterward. Students sharing their stories, thanking her, asking for advice. Parents who'd brought their children to hear her speak. Teachers from other schools wanting to implement similar programs. And then, unexpectedly, Mr. Rodriguez appeared in line. The physics teacher who'd risked his job to share security footage. He looked nervous as he approached. "Ms. Carter, I wanted to apologize," he said. "I should have done more sooner. I should have stood up the first time I saw something wrong, not waited until it became a crisis. I let you down." Alyssa studied him for a moment, seeing the genuine remorse in his eyes. "Mr. Rodriguez, you did stand up. When it mattered most, you chose what was right over what was safe. That's all any of us can do." He nodded, relief washing over his features. "Thank you. And thank you for teaching us all, teachers included, what real courage looks like." As the crowd finally dispersed, Alyssa found herself standing in the courtyard with Marissa and Jamal. The three of them looked at the banner hanging over the stage. "A school without violence, a future we build together." "We actually did it," Marissa said softly. "We actually changed something." "No," Alyssa corrected, putting her arms around her friends. "We started something. The real work begins now, making sure this sticks, making sure it spreads, making sure what happened to me becomes impossible for anyone else." Jamal grinned. "So what you're saying is the Justice League's work is never done." Alyssa laughed, the sound free and genuine. "Something like that." That night, Alyssa's speech had already been viewed 2 million times online. News outlets were running clips. Other schools were reaching out asking how they could implement similar programs. The message was spreading, multiplying, growing into something far bigger than one girl's story. Before bed, Alyssa checked her phone one last time. There was a new message this time from an email address she didn't recognize. She almost deleted it, but curiosity won out. "Dear Alyssa, you don't know me. My name is Sophie, and I'm a sophomore at Lincoln High across the city. I've been bullied for 2 years. I stopped eating lunch because I was afraid of what they'd do in the cafeteria. I stopped speaking in class because every time I did, they'd mock me online afterward. I started thinking maybe I should just drop out. But then I saw your speech. I watched you stand up there and say everything I've been feeling but couldn't put into words. And I realized I have a choice. I can stay silent and let them win, or I can speak up and fight for myself. Tomorrow, I'm reporting what's been happening to me. I'm using my voice, because you showed me I have one. Thank you for being brave enough to make the rest of us brave too." Alyssa read the message 3 times, tears streaming down her face. This was why it all mattered. Not the news coverage or the policy changes or the viral videos, but this one person finding their voice because she'd found hers. She wrote back, "Sophie, I'm proud of you. Speaking up is the hardest thing you'll ever do. But you're not alone anymore. None of us are. Stay strong, and let me know if you need support. We're in this together." She hit send and set down her phone, feeling something shift inside her chest. The fear that had defined so much of her life was still there. She suspected it always would be, but it no longer controlled her. It no longer made her small. Alyssa Carter had found her voice, and in doing so, she'd helped countless others find theirs. The silent girl who'd walked into Crestwood High trying to disappear had become a beacon, a symbol, a reminder that change was possible when people chose courage over comfort. Tomorrow, she'd go back to being a student. She'd study for tests and worry about college applications and navigate the normal chaos of teenage life. But she'd do it differently now, with her head high, with her voice ready, with the knowledge that she'd stood up to power and won not through violence or revenge, but through the simple revolutionary act of refusing to be silenced. And somewhere 3 states away, Brandon Hale sat in his small room at the therapeutic boarding school, reading the same speech online. Tears rolled down his face as he listened to the girl he'd tried to destroy speak about forgiveness, about change, about second chances. He didn't deserve her grace. He knew that. But maybe, just maybe, he could spend the rest of his life trying to earn it. Not from her, he had no right to ask that, but from himself, from the person he wanted to become. The cycle of hurt was broken. And in its place, something new was growing. Something that looked a lot like hope. 3 months after the ceremony, Alyssa sat in a television studio in downtown, adjusting the small microphone clipped to her collar. The makeup artist had just finished touching up her face, and now she waited in the green room watching the monitor that showed the live broadcast of the morning news program. Her mother sat beside her, calm and steady, as always an anchoring presence in the controlled chaos of the studio. "You nervous?" Jasmine asked, though she already knew the answer. She could read her daughter like a book written in her own handwriting. "A little," Alyssa admitted. "This is different from the school ceremony. That was our community. This is national television." The door opened, and a production assistant poked her head in. "Ms. Carter, you're on in 5 minutes." Alyssa nodded, her stomach doing somersaults. The invitation had come 2 weeks ago, a request for her to appear on Morning America Today, one of the country's most watched breakfast shows. They wanted her to talk about bullying, about the changes at Crestwood, about the movement that had grown from one viral video into a nationwide conversation about privilege, accountability, and student safety. The Students for Students program had exploded beyond anyone's expectations. Schools in 17 states had reached out asking for guidance on implementing similar initiatives. The hashtag Justice for Alyssa had evolved into Brave to Speak, a broader campaign encouraging students everywhere to report bullying and demand action. Alyssa's inbox was flooded daily with messages from kids sharing their stories, asking for advice, thanking her for giving them courage. But with the growth came scrutiny. Critics had emerged, people who claimed she was exaggerating the problem, that she was attacking wealthy families unfairly, that she was creating a culture of victimhood rather than resilience. Some of the harshest criticism came from parents at elite schools who saw the movement as a threat to their children's advantages. One particularly vicious op-ed had called her an opportunist leveraging teenage drama for attention and profit, conveniently ignoring that Alyssa hadn't accepted a single dollar from the media appearances or speaking requests. The production assistant returned. "We're ready for you, Ms. Carter." Alyssa stood smoothing down her blouse. A deep blue, her mother had said, brought out her eyes and projected confidence. Jasmine squeezed her hand once, a silent transfer of strength from mother to daughter, and then Alyssa was walking onto the brightly lit set. The host, Jennifer Walsh, was a veteran journalist known for her tough but fair interviews. She stood to greet Alyssa with a warm smile, shaking her hand before they both settled into the comfortable chairs arranged for conversation rather than interrogation. "We're live in 30 seconds, a voice called from behind the cameras. Jennifer leaned in slightly. "Just be yourself. Tell your truth. That's all anyone can ask." The countdown began. 5, 4, 3, 2. "Welcome back," Jennifer said to the camera, her smile professional and genuine. "We're here with Alyssa Carter, the young woman whose experience with bullying at Crestwood High School sparked a nationwide movement demanding accountability and change in our education system. Alyssa, thank you for being here." "Thank you for having me," Alyssa said, and was pleased to hear her voice came out steady. "Let's start at the beginning," Jennifer said. "You were the new student at an elite school. What was that like?" Alyssa thought about those early days, the careful invisibility, the constant vigilance. "It was like walking through a minefield," she said honestly. "I knew from day one that I was different, not just because I was new, but because I didn't fit the mold of what Crestwood students typically looked like. I didn't have designer clothes or a luxury car. My mom's a military officer, not a CEO. And I learned quickly that at schools like that, those differences make you a target." "You tried to stay invisible," Jennifer prompted. "I did. I thought if I was quiet enough, small enough, unnoticeable enough, I could just get through it. But what I learned is that bullies don't target you because of what you do. They target you because of what you represent, a reminder that their world isn't as perfect and exclusive as they want it to be." Jennifer nodded, her expression sympathetic, but probing. "The videos that went viral show a pattern of harassment culminating in a physical altercation. Walk us through what was going through your mind in those moments." Alyssa took a breath, remembering the feeling of Brandon's hand on her collar, the wall against her back, the cameras everywhere. "Honestly, I was terrified. But underneath the fear was something else, anger. Not just at Brandon, but at every adult who'd looked the other way. At a system that had sent me the message over and over that I didn't matter as much as someone whose parents could write a check. In that moment, I had a choice. I could let him and everyone watching define who I was, or I could define myself. And you chose to fight back." "I chose to defend myself," Alyssa corrected gently. "There's a difference. Fighting back implies aggression. What I did was protect myself from someone who was attacking me. My mother, who's a lieutenant colonel in the army, taught me self-defense. She always said it was a last resort, something you only use when you have no other choice. That day, I had no other choice." Jennifer leaned forward slightly. "Some critics have said that your response was disproportionate, that you could have just walked away." Alyssa felt a flash of the old anger, but kept her voice level. "Walk away to where he had me pinned against a wall. His friends were blocking any exit. And even if I could have walked away physically, where was I supposed to go emotionally? How many times was I supposed to accept being humiliated, having my property destroyed, being assaulted before I was allowed to say enough?" The studio was quiet, except for the soft whir of cameras. Jennifer's eyes showed approval. This was exactly the kind of honest, unscripted moment that made for compelling television. "Let's talk about what happened after," Jennifer said. "The investigation, the hearing, the revelations about financial corruption. Did you expect any of that?" "No," Alyssa said simply. "I just wanted the bullying to stop. I didn't know about the money laundering or the systematic protection of wealthy students. But once it started coming out, it made sense. The reason adults kept looking away wasn't just cowardice, though there was plenty of that. It was a system built on money where donations bought not just new gymnasiums, but immunity from consequences. Richard Hale is currently facing federal charges, Jennifer noted. How do you feel about that? Alyssa chose her words carefully. I feel sad, honestly. Sad that it took a criminal investigation to force accountability. Sad that his son was raised to believe that money and power were more important than basic human decency. Sad that there are probably dozens of other schools where the same thing is happening, but nobody's caught it yet. She paused. But I also feel hopeful. Because it proves that the system can change. It's hard, and it takes people being willing to speak up and face the consequences, but it can change. Jennifer shifted gears. You've received some criticism, particularly from parents at elite schools who say you're demonizing wealth and privilege. How do you respond to that? I'm not demonizing wealth, Alyssa said firmly. I'm demonizing the abuse of wealth. There's nothing wrong with having money or attending a nice school. What's wrong is when money buys the right to hurt people without consequences. What's wrong is when privilege becomes permission to treat others as less than human. She looked directly at the camera. If parents hear my story and feel attacked, they need to ask themselves why. Is it because they recognize that their children are bullies, or because they've been using their money to protect bad behavior instead of correcting it? Jennifer smiled, the kind of smile that said Alyssa had just delivered exactly the soundbite that would trend on social media for the next week. You've started something much bigger than one school or one incident. Students across the country are speaking up, reporting bullying, demanding change. What's your message to them? Alyssa thought about Sophie's email, about the hundreds of others like it, about kids finding courage they didn't know they had. My message is this. Your voice matters. Your experience is valid. And you deserve to feel safe at school. All of you, not just the ones whose parents can afford to buy safety. Don't let anyone tell you that speaking up is causing trouble. Speaking up is preventing trouble. It's stopping the cycle of hurt before it destroys someone else. She felt the emotions rising, but pushed through. And to the kids who are scared because speaking up might have consequences, I know. I was scared too. I'm still scared sometimes, but silence has consequences too. The consequence of silence is that nothing changes. The consequence of silence is that the next new kid, the next quiet kid, the next different kid gets targeted the same way. When you speak up, you're not just protecting yourself. You're protecting everyone who comes after you. The interview continued for another 10 minutes, covering the Students for Students program, the policy changes at Crestwood, and Alyssa's plans for the future. When it wrapped, Jennifer stood and hugged her, a gesture that went beyond professional courtesy. You're going to change the world, Jennifer said quietly. You already are. Backstage, Alyssa's phone was already exploding with notifications. The interview had been live, and clips were spreading across social media in real time. But one notification stood out, an email from the National Education Association, one of the country's largest teachers' unions. The subject line read, Speaking Invitation National Conference on Student Safety. Jasmine read it over her daughter's shoulder. They want you to keynote their annual conference. 3,000 educators from across the country. She looked at Alyssa with pride shining in her eyes. Baby, you're not just changing one school anymore. You're changing how the entire country thinks about student safety. The conference was 6 weeks later, held in a massive convention center in Chicago. Alyssa stood backstage looking out at an audience that stretched back so far she couldn't see the last row. 3,000 teachers, administrators, counselors, and education policymakers all waiting to hear from a 17-year-old girl who'd simply refused to stay silent. Dr. Webb had flown in to introduce her. He took the stage to thunderous applause. He'd become something of a celebrity in education circles for his transformation of Crestwood High. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, his voice carrying across the vast space. "We talk a lot about student safety in the abstract. We write policies and create protocols and hold training sessions. But sometimes it takes a student to show us what student safety really means. It means creating an environment where a young woman can walk into school without fear, where her voice will be heard if she's harmed, where the adults in her life will choose what's right over what's convenient." He paused, letting that sink in. Alyssa Carter didn't just expose a problem. She gave us a roadmap for solving it. Please welcome Alyssa Carter. The applause was deafening. Alyssa walked onto the stage, and this time the fear was manageable. She'd learned something important over the last months. The fear never completely went away, but it no longer paralyzed her. It energized her, instead sharpened her focus, reminded her why this mattered. She looked out at 3,000 faces, people who'd dedicated their lives to education, who'd chosen to be in rooms with teenagers every day, who had the power to make schools safer or to look away when it was convenient. "I'm going to tell you something that might be uncomfortable to hear," she began, her voice clear and strong. "Some of you have failed students the way my teachers failed me, not because you're bad people, but because the system you work in makes it easier to fail than to fight." The room was absolutely silent. People shifted uncomfortably, but they were listening. "I don't say that to attack you. I say it because we can't fix what we won't acknowledge. Mr. Patterson, my history teacher, wasn't a monster. He was a tired, underpaid educator who was afraid of losing his job if he stood up to a student whose father funded half the school. That fear is understandable, but it's not acceptable. Because while he was protecting his job, I was being destroyed in his classroom." She could see some teachers nodding, recognizing themselves or their colleagues in the story. But here's the thing about fear: it's contagious. When students see teachers too afraid to protect them, they learn that speaking up is pointless. They learn that power wins always. They learn to be silent or to become bullies themselves because those seem like the only options. Alyssa's voice grew more passionate. "We have to break that cycle, and it starts with you." She spent the next 20 minutes laying out practical steps, how to create reporting systems that students trusted, how to investigate complaints, even when it was politically inconvenient, how to build cultures of accountability that didn't depend on wealth or influence. She talked about the importance of peer advocacy, about empowering students to protect each other. She shared data from Crestwood's transformation. Bullying incidents were down 60%, student trust in administration was up dramatically, and academic performance had actually improved because kids felt safe enough to focus on learning. "Change is possible," she said, nearing the end of her speech. "But it requires courage. The kind of courage that says, I will protect students even if it costs me something, even if it makes my job harder, even if it means standing up to power." She paused, looking out at the sea of educators. "You have more power than you think. A teacher who refuses to look away, who documents everything, who insists on accountability, that teacher can start a revolution." She told them about Mr. Rodriguez, the physics teacher, who'd risked everything to share security footage. He didn't have tenure. He didn't have seniority. He was a young teacher who could have easily been fired, but he chose students over security. And because of that choice, an entire system changed. Her voice dropped, became more intimate. "Each of you has that same choice every single day. And I'm here to tell you that students are watching. They're waiting to see if you'll be the adult who finally stands up for them." As she spoke, she noticed people pulling out their phones not to record her, but to take notes. Hands were furiously writing on provided notepads. This wasn't just a speech anymore. It was a training session, a call to action, a blueprint for transformation. I want to close with something my mother taught me, Alyssa said. She told me that a true hero isn't the one who stands alone. A true hero is the one who makes everyone around them stand together. I didn't stop Brandon Hale by myself. I had Marissa, who recorded when everyone else looked away. I had Jamal, who stood up when he could have stayed comfortable. I had Mr. Rodriguez, who chose truth over security. I had my mother, who taught me that courage is a choice you make every single day. She looked directly at the audience, making eye contact with as many people as she could. So here's my challenge to you: be the adult that a student can count on. Be the teacher who doesn't look away. Be the administrator who values safety over donations. Be the person who makes the hero's choice especially when it's hard. The standing ovation lasted 4 minutes. But more importantly, Alyssa watched as teachers pulled out their phones to take pictures of the slides she'd shown as they exchanged contact information with colleagues as they began the conversations that would lead to real change in their own schools. After the conference, the requests multiplied exponentially. Schools wanted her to speak. Districts wanted her to consult. Nonprofit organizations wanted her to join their boards. But Alyssa was selective, always asking the same question: will this help students who are suffering right now? If the answer was yes, she said yes. If it was about publicity or profit, she declined. The movement continued to grow. Brave. To Speak chapters formed in middle schools and high schools across the country. Students were creating their own peer advocacy programs, filming their own stories, demanding their own changes. The fire Alyssa had sparked was spreading, carried by thousands of voices that had found their courage. 6 months after the national conference, Alyssa received a letter on official government letterhead. She opened it in her kitchen, her mother looking over her shoulder. It was an invitation from the Department of Education. They wanted to honor her with the National Student Courage and Justice Award, to be presented at a ceremony in Washington, D.C. "Oh my God," Jasmine whispered, reading the letter. "Baby, this is incredible." Alyssa stared at the letter, barely able to process it. A national award. Recognition from the federal government. It felt surreal, impossible. She was just a girl who'd defended herself, who'd refused to stay silent. But Jasmine saw it differently. "You know what this means? It means they can't ignore this issue anymore. It means student safety is a national priority now. It means every student who speaks up from here on out has the weight of federal recognition behind them." The ceremony was held in a grand hall in Washington, with marble columns and chandeliers that sparkled like stars. Alyssa wore a formal dress, feeling out of place among the senators and education officials and policymakers. But when she walked onto that stage to receive her award, she looked out and saw something that grounded her rows of students in the audience, kids who'd traveled from across the country to be there, many of them survivors of bullying who'd found their voices through her story. The Secretary of Education presented the award, a beautiful crystal sculpture engraved with her name, and the words, "For extraordinary courage in the pursuit of justice and student safety." But it was what Alyssa did next that would be remembered. Instead of giving a traditional acceptance speech, she invited students from the audience to join her on stage. One by one they came forward, kids of all races, backgrounds, and stories. There was Miguel from Texas, who'd started an anti-bullying program after being hospitalized from an attack. There was Destiny from New York, who'd exposed a teacher who'd been harassing students for years. There was James from Oregon, who'd come out as gay and faced relentless bullying until his school finally implemented real protections. Alyssa stood among them, holding her award, and spoke not just to the officials in the room, but to every student watching online. "This award has my name on it, but it belongs to all of us. Every student who's ever spoken up. Every kid who's ever refused to accept that bullying is just part of growing up. Every young person who's decided that they deserve better and fought to make it happen. She looked at the students surrounding her on stage, then back at the audience. We're told that young people are the future, but I'm here to tell you that we're also the present. We're making change right now. We're not waiting for adults to fix things, we're fixing them ourselves, and we're bringing the adults along who are brave enough to help. The ceremony ended with all the students on stage linking hands, a visual representation of unity and strength. The image was captured by dozens of cameras and would appear on the front page of newspapers across the country the next morning. That evening, as Alyssa and her mother walked through the National Mall, past the monuments lit up against the night sky, Jasmine stopped and turned to her daughter. "I need to tell you something," she said, and there were tears in her eyes. "When you were born, I prayed that you would be strong, that you would be brave, that you would stand up for what's right no matter the cost." She cupped Alyssa's face in her hands. "But I never imagined you'd inspire millions of others to do the same. You didn't just answer my prayer, baby. You exceeded it in ways I couldn't have dreamed." Alyssa hugged her mother, feeling the weight of everything they'd been through, the fear, the fights, the victories, the ongoing struggle. "I couldn't have done it without you," she whispered. "You taught me how to be strong." "No," Jasmine said, pulling back to look her daughter in the eyes. "I taught you techniques. You taught yourself how to be strong. That came from inside you." The next morning, back at Crestwood High, Alyssa walked through halls that felt completely different from those first terrifying days. Students greeted her, smiled at her, treated her not like a celebrity, but like one of them, because that's what she was. The Justice League met during lunch, planning their next initiative, discussing new schools that wanted to implement their program. Marissa was organizing a nationwide virtual summit for student advocates. Jamal was working with the athletic department to create a sports-based anti-bullying program, and Alyssa was balancing all of it with college applications homework and the normal chaos of being 17. "Sometimes I can't believe this is real," Marissa said, scrolling through messages from schools requesting information. "A year ago, we were nobodies. Now we're literally changing education policy." "We were never nobodies," Alyssa corrected gently. "We were just waiting for our moment to matter." That afternoon, as Alyssa sat in her history class taught now by Ms. Lawrence, a passionate educator who actually cared about students, an announcement came over the intercom. "Alyssa Carter, please report to the main office." Alyssa gathered her things, used to these interruptions now. But when she got to the office, she found Dr. Webb standing there with an envelope in his hands and an expression she couldn't quite read. "Alyssa," he said, "this just arrived. I think you need to read it." She took the envelope, noticing it had been sent from the therapeutic boarding school where Brandon was attending. Her hands shook slightly as she opened it, a handwritten letter on simple notebook paper. "Dear Alyssa," it began. "I've started this letter 100 times and thrown it away 99. But my therapist says I need to face hard things, and this is one of the hardest. I want to tell you about the person I'm becoming. Not to make excuses or ask forgiveness, but because you deserve to know that your courage didn't just save you, it saved me too." The letter went on for 3 pages. Brandon wrote about the therapy he was doing, the trauma he was unpacking, the realization that his father's abuse had turned him into an abuser. He wrote about the shame of watching himself on those videos, seeing the monster he'd become. He wrote about the other students at the school, many of them former bullies like him, all of them trying to break cycles of hurt and learn to be better, to be— "I'm not asking you to forgive me," the letter concluded. "I don't deserve that. But I want you to know that I'm trying every day to become someone worthy of the second chance you gave me when you could have destroyed me completely. I'm volunteering at a crisis hotline for bullied kids. I'm speaking to groups of students about how privilege can poison you if you let it. I'm trying to turn the worst thing I ever did into something that might help someone else. I'll never undo the harm I caused you, but maybe if I work hard enough, I can prevent someone else from being harmed the same way. Thank you for showing me that change is possible. Thank you for being stronger than I ever was. Thank you for teaching me that real strength isn't about dominating others, it's about protecting them. Alyssa read the letter twice, then looked up at Dr. Webb. He's really changing. People can, Dr. Webb said, when they're given the right support and held accountable for their actions. You gave him both the consequences he needed and the grace to grow from them. That night, Alyssa wrote back. Not a long letter, just a few lines. Brandon. I'm glad you're doing the work. Real change is hard, and it takes courage to face who you were and choose to be different. Keep going, keep growing, keep helping others. That's how you honor the second chance you've been given. She mailed it the next morning, knowing that forgiveness was a journey, not a destination, and that both she and Brandon were walking their own paths toward healing. Months turned into a year. The Students for Students program was now active in 43 states. The Brave to Speak movement had led to policy changes in dozens of school districts. Congressional hearings had been held on bullying and school safety, with Alyssa testifying alongside education experts and psychologists. The Department of Education had issued new guidelines for investigating and addressing bullying, with special emphasis on ensuring that wealth and privilege didn't buy immunity. But for Alyssa, the most meaningful changes were the small ones, the messages from individual students who'd found their voices, the teachers who'd stood up to protect kids, when it would have been easier to look away the schools that were slowly transforming their cultures from toxic to supportive. On the 1-year anniversary of the day, Brandon had torn up her notebook, Crestwood High, held a special assembly. The entire student body gathered in the auditorium, but this time Alyssa wasn't alone on the stage. She stood with Marissa Jamal, Mr. Rodriguez, Dr. Webb, and a dozen other students and teachers who'd been part of the transformation. Dr. Webb spoke first, acknowledging how far they'd come and how far they still had to go. Then he invited Alyssa to say a few words. She looked out at the sea of faces, some she knew, many. She didn't. All of them part of a community that had been broken and was rebuilding itself piece by piece. A year ago, she began. I stood in a classroom with torn pages scattered around my feet, feeling more alone than I'd ever felt in my life. I thought that was my lowest moment, but I was wrong. My lowest moment would have been if I'd accepted it, if I'd stayed silent, if I'd let them convince me that I didn't matter. She paused, gathering her thoughts. This year has taught me something important. Change doesn't happen because of one person. It happens because one person inspires another, who inspires another, who inspires another. It spreads like fire, jumping from heart to heart until suddenly the whole world is burning with the desire for something better. She looked at the students who'd joined the Justice League, at the peer advocates, who spent their lunch periods helping classmates, at the teachers who'd recommitted to protecting students above all else. You are all part of that fire. Every time you speak up for someone who's being hurt, every time you refuse to laugh at someone else's pain, every time you choose compassion over cruelty, you're keeping that fire alive. Her voice grew stronger, more passionate. They thought silence was strength. They thought money was power. They thought privilege was protection, but we proved them wrong. We proved that the most powerful force in the world is people who refuse to accept injustice, who stand together, who demand better, and won't stop until they get it. The applause started small, but grew until it filled the auditorium, echoing off the walls, a sound of affirmation and commitment and hope. After the assembly, as students filed out chattering and laughing and moving through halls that felt safe now, Alyssa stood with her mother near the front entrance. They looked at the new banner hanging there, one that Dr. Webb had commissioned to replace all the donor plaques, "A school without violence, a future we build together." "You did it," Jasmine said softly. "You really did it." "We did it," Alyssa corrected, taking her mother's hand. "All of us. Together." They walked out into the sunlight side by side, mother and daughter, soldier and student, two women who understood that real strength wasn't about how hard you could hit it, was about how you could take the worst thing that ever happened to you and transform it into something that helped everyone else. Behind them, Crestwood High stood as a testament to the power of speaking up, of refusing to accept that wrong was right, just because someone powerful said so. The school had been broken, but it was healing. The system had been corrupt, but it was changing. And it all started because one quiet girl decided that silence was no longer an option. Alyssa's phone buzzed with a message. Another student from another school, another story of finding courage. She smiled and wrote back, already planning her response, already thinking about how to help, already knowing that this work would never really be done because there would always be someone who needed to hear that their voice mattered. But that was okay, because she wasn't alone anymore. None of them were. The fire had spread, the voices had risen, and the future, that future they were building together, was brighter than any of them had dared to imagine when this all began. The story of Alyssa Carter didn't end with a girl who fought back against her bullies. It ended with millions of students finding their voices, thousands of schools transforming their cultures, and countless lives saved because one person decided that enough was enough. It ended with the understanding that justice isn't something you wait for. It's something you create, one brave choice at a time. And somewhere in classrooms across the country, quiet kids who'd been trying to disappear were learning that they didn't have to be invisible anymore. They could be seen. They could be heard. They could matter because Alyssa Carter had shown them the way, and the path she'd carved was wide enough for everyone to walk together.